Hello everyone. Something a little bit different today. A book that I did not enjoy too much. Found some of the short stories a little bit of a chore to read. Of course, I will get into that. Why that was the case. Teatro Grottesco by Thomas Ligotti. This is my third attempt at reviewing the book. Third attempt at recording this review. I found the short stories to be a little bit difficult to parse and present in a coherent way, and because of the nature of not really enjoying some of the short stories, I can't really remember them too well. Some of the short stories as well, they don't particularly have a coherent plot or a message to be delivered, so again you can see why it's somewhat difficult to describe. But this is Teatro Grottesco by Thomas Ligotti, and if you're not aware of Thomas Ligotti, he's a sort of underground writer, very pessimistic, nihilistic. He's linked with people like H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, Robert Aickman, Thomas Bernard, I believe, Eugene Thacker as well, and he even has links with the TV show, almost said TV show Rust, TV show True Detective, which I haven't seen. It's actually one of the reasons why I didn't pick up this book straight away. I'm not particularly a fan of links between books and TV shows, especially popular TV shows. But I guess it's good that more like darker ideas and literary fiction is being literary ideas are being disseminated into a more popular sort of space. Also, another reason why I didn't pick it up, even though this was on my radar for quite a long time, is that I'm not particularly interested in the settings that are involved in this book: gas stations, carnivals, imagery like puppets and office workers, etc. So let's get into it though. I'll read the back of the book to start off with. Thomas Ligotti is one of the most original and remarkable figures in horror literature since H.P. Lovecraft, and Teatro Grottesco, which by the way means theatre of the grotesque or the grotesque theatre. Ligotti follows a literary tradition that began with Edgar Allan Poe, portraying characters that are outside of anything that might be called normal life, depicting strange locales far off the beaten track, and rendering a grim vision of human existence as a perpetual nightmare. Just by entering his unique world where odd little towns and dark sectors are peopled with clowns and hideous puppets, and where tormented individuals and blackly comic eccentrics play out their doom, is to risk your own vision of the world. I'm not particularly sure why the reference to Lovecraft, to be honest. It's very much, there is a sort of cosmic misanthropic element to this book, but there's no amorphous blobs or dark, chaotic old gods or anything like that. It's very much half realism, half fantasy, half dark fantasy. Never really goes as far as Azathoth or anything like that. So this is the part where I somewhat struggle, because to describe this book is really quite a challenge. Short stories set up into three different sections: derangements, deformations, and the damaged and the disease. And as you can imagine, the short stories involved under these headings are they pertain to the heading. So we'll have deranged characters, we'll have characters with deformations, damaged and diseased characters as well. A lot of these stories I didn't enjoy. A few of them I did. One of them I didn't enjoy was The Red Tower. The Red Tower is considered one of the best works actually of Ligotti's fiction. A lot of the stories are plotless, and the Red Tower is one of those. It deals with a factory that produces grotesque objects for no discernible reason, and the factory expands. It's really just there's no character in this story. We're just viewing a factory out in a wasteland producing these strange objects, and there's graves underground, there's symbolism that isn't explained. That's one of the gripes I have with this book actually. I like when there's symbolism, and I like when there's things not explained. But with Ligotti's fiction, a lot of it is just, it's almost like, what am I thinking? Because when you read a certain amount, you can say, oh, I can link this to this and that to that. But most of the time I actually just had no idea what I was reading about, and I actually almost fell asleep reading the Red Tower. Some nice imagery, but yeah, I didn't particularly enjoy that story, to be honest. The Red Tower. Another one was quite interesting to begin with, was this Sideshow and Other Stories, which is about two insomniac writers meeting at a cafe every once in a while, discussing their own particular worldview, and the older writer is a sort of mentor to the younger writer, and he has a particular misanthropic worldview, and he tries to get that across to the younger writer, and eventually he leaves and presents in a sort of package, I think, or just a bound bundle of papers, his own short stories that he wrote to try and get his point across. So the story Sideshow and Other Stories is a sort of vignette of short stories that were written by the older writer. So you'll have stories like The Malignant Matrix, The Phenomenal Frenzy, things like that. I think there's 4 of them in total, and a lot of them deal again with pessimism, nihilism, some antinatalism in there as well. In my other reviews I did try and attempt to read some of those, but it takes a little bit too long. I will give you a quick example of sort of clinical nature of the language. A lot of these stories aren't as clinical and quite they're almost warm in a way. I say warm in a very relative sense. Warm compared to what I'm about to read. A lot of Ligotti's fiction is brutally grey and bleak, but I'll just find this first. The Malignant Matrix. I'll just read a couple of paragraphs from this. First, I had been privileged to receive frequent and detailed communications regarding the most advanced scientific and metaphysical studies. This information was of a highly specialised nature that seemed to be unknown to the common run of scientists and metaphysicians, yet was nevertheless attainable by such avid non-specialists as myself, providing of course that one possessed a receptive temperament and willingly opened oneself to certain channels of thought and experience. One day I received a very special communication whereby I learned that an astounding and quite unexpected breakthrough had been achieved, the culmination, it appeared, of many years of intense scientific and metaphysical study. The communication informed me, concerned nothing less than the discovery of the true origins of all existential phenomena, both physical and metaphysical, the very source, as I understood the claims being made, of existence in their broadest possible sense. And he goes on to enter what he thinks is going to be a laboratory, but it's a dingy stairwell, and he meets this grotesque creature that has been thrust into phenomenal existence, birth essentially. So that's the Sideshow and Other Stories. It's little vignettes essentially. Another one I really did enjoy was a collection of short stories within a short story again of called In a Foreign Town in a Foreign Land, which is about a border town. So it's a sort of like a microcosm. So stories like A Soft Voice Whispers Nothing, The Bells Will Sound Forever, all of these take place in this border town, and some of these stories I just found that just ended so abruptly, and I read some of the reviews as well, and some people just said, is that it? One of them deals with uncreation in a graveyard, others just strange wooden hands in hospitals, and I can't quite get across, when you read it, it's just, some is very dry and then it just ends abruptly. It's already 9 minutes and 34 seconds in. So a lot of these, I don't want to dwell too much on the negative ones. Yes, didn't particularly enjoy In a Foreign Town in a Foreign Land. But to break it up though, I will talk about some of the ones I did enjoy. Another one, one that I did enjoy was The Town Manager, which is a town that at the beginning notices that their town manager has gone, this authoritative figure. The lights are off in his office building, if I remember correctly, and throughout the story we learn that this town is sort of cyclical. A town manager will enter and then leave unexplained reasons, and we learn that as time goes on, each town manager is more degenerate than the last, and the town slowly fades. And one of the town managers that comes in this story, he essentially takes the piss out of the town and its citizens, its populace, by making them out to be a sort of carnival and having another town visit them. And so that's quite an interesting idea. I found quite scathing, actually. Another short story that I found to be a lot better than the others. This book is very much, some books you get are just decent all the way through. This one is very much a terrible, great sort of spectrum. Similar to the town manager, our temporary supervisor is sort of corporate horror. This is a great story. It's very atmospheric. It's about factory workers that are have to deal with a strange force that takes over their factory. They're fitting together metal pieces for no discernible reason, and overlooked by another supervisor. So their supervisor leaves, and we have the shadow that dwells in a cubicle that watches them. And some really tense moments where people decide to, one of the characters, he's fitting these metal pieces together, and he can't. Everyone's tense and watching. They're eyeing each other up, trying to figure out what the shadow is that's just appeared one day in the cubicle, and they fear to do anything out of the ordinary. And this young man just says, "I can't take it anymore," and just walks up to the cubicle, and then goes inside. And I won't sort of spoil what happens in the end, but really tense. Back to the short stories that I didn't particularly enjoy. The titular story of Teatro Grottesco contained within a section dealing with mostly troubled artists, and I did find it got a little bit tedious, quite a bit tedious by the end. A lot of the last stories are dealing with artists with intestinal viruses, and I think that was quite a problem for Ligotti, really, in real life. A lot of hospitals, a lot of musings on art and life, as you might expect. Teatro Grottesco itself, though, is about it's somewhat difficult to describe. It's about, contrary to what you might think, the Teatro Grottesco itself is a group of unexplained beings, I suppose, that are described by the author as being, or the writer, the protagonist in the story, as being an anti-art phenomenon. Meetings, strange meetings that the artists in the story have, the group of artists in the story have with the Teatro Grottesco, suck out their artistic passion and drive for various reasons. It's a somewhat interesting idea. I think the idea is, what I got from it is the idea of the absolute nonsense nature of reality, and how something that can make so little sense that art, because of course art itself needs some sort of structure to be understood. An encounter with the Teatro Grottesco just obliterates all notions of objectivism and an understanding of reality, I suppose, is what I got from it, I think. And we have this strange meeting at the end where we're in a hospital, and there's a doctor who has a globe of black starlight, and it's very strange. One of my least short stories was Severini, which is somewhat of a fever dream. Really almost had no idea what I was reading, and I'm not convinced that it's... Usually I blame myself for not understanding works of fiction, but this just made no sense. If I just pick out some words here: esoteric procedures, illicit practices, amoebic dysentery. It's by the end of the story, a character is melding into another character, and it's just it's mind-boggling, really. Yes, I don't think... So the reason I'm reviewing this in the first place is because the last two ones I really did enjoy. The Bungalow House and The Shadow of the Darkness were really quite good. Definitely worth reading. Just a lot of these I haven't actually described, and I haven't described well, I'm aware of that. However, we'll focus on the Bungalow House first, and then we'll talk about Shadow in the Darkness. The Bungalow House is about a man who works at a museum and who visits an area in his lunch break. He finds a tape recording left by a stranger, and he hears on this tape recording a voice that is describing a particular feeling of cold bleakness, I suppose. And he feels he's describing a bungalow house to start off with. This man, this person who works in a museum and is visiting the art gallery, becomes infatuated with this tape recording, and he wants to meet the person who recorded, whose voice it is on this tape recorder, who recorded this strange monologue, strange audio tape. He essentially tries to purchase it off the art gallery owner. And I don't want to give too much spoilers away, but eventually we find out that, of course, it's Ligotti, so things aren't as simple. And there's a melding of the person who's listening to the audio tape and the person who created the audio tape. And by far one of my favourite stories, very engaging. Definitely a plot structure there. A review actually did say that you get a sense of the wonder of the audio tape, and you feel bad when the character who's trying to purchase it can't purchase it. He's not allowed to purchase it from this art gallery, and you feel you want him to have it, because it's something he feels that no one else has been able to understand what he feels, because he identifies with what the audio tape is saying and what the man in the audio tape is saying. You just have to read it to find out the significance of this audio tape and why it's so important for the man who listens to it. And there are other audio tapes as well that discuss other areas, and he always feels vaguely that he's been there before, that he's been to the bungalow house, etc., and all these other places. It's really quite intriguing story. So that was the Bungalow House. Definitely enjoyed that. A lot better than the other stories. The last short story I'm going to talk about is The Shadow of the Darkness, which is by far my favourite story in the collection. So again, obviously, I really did not enjoy a lot of the stories, but this is just levels above the other ones. For me, the language wasn't as good as the other ones that I did enjoy. I think the Bungalow House is definitely better overall in terms of the plot and character, but The Shadow of the Darkness has some very interesting ideas, I feel. So a character called Grossvogel, he's pronounced it Grossvogel, but I believe it's a German name, Grossvogel. He's an artist who succumbs to gastrointestinal pain. Again, it's very common throughout his stories. And he's an artist. He begins as an artist, but this bout of gastrointestinal pain, this period of agony, opens his mind and opens his eyes to something that he calls the darkness. And he creates sculptures called salal, I believe it is a Hebrew word for endarkening. I will read what Grossvogel says about this darkness. I definitely could not encapsulate it. So the context is that he's brought, he was nearly on the point of death, and he has brought the sculpture, the salal that he calls it, to an art gallery, and he is describing what he now feels and now experiences to these artists, which he once felt akin to, but now he's detached. So this is what he has to say about the darkness and the shadow of the darkness. I was attempting during this period I speak of, and for that matter throughout my entire life, to make something with my mind, specifically to create works of art by the only means possible I believed were available to me, which was by using my mind, or by using my imagination or my creative faculties, some force or function of what people call a soul or spirit, or simply a personal self. But when I found myself collapsed upon the floor of this art gallery, and later at the hospital experiencing the most agony, I was overwhelmed by the realization that I had no mind or imagination that I could use, that there was nothing I could call a soul or self. Those things were all nonsense and dreams. I realized in my severe gastrointestinal distress that the only thing that had any existence at all was this larger than average physical body of mine, and I realized that there was nothing for this body to do except to function in physical pain, and that there was nothing for it to be except what it was, not an artist or a creator of any kind, but solely a mass of flesh, a system of tissues and bones and so forth, suffering the agonies of a disorder of its digestive system, and that anything that did not directly stem from these facts, especially producing works of art, was profoundly and utterly false and unreal. So he's essentially saying that he is thrust into, from the world of art and ideas and concepts, into the purely animal and the purely bodily, I suppose, and he feels that his art is worthless. And he goes on to talk about this activating force, which is the darkness, which is, I suppose, the life force itself, this darkness, this need to reproduce, of course, and spread out and proliferate. And so it's essentially like a reduction. It's materialism, essentially. So from high art to the animalistic and the bodily, I suppose. Of course, that isn't all that the book is. It's not just a big essay. There's really quite an interesting twist where, suffice it to say, Grossvogel tries to get the artist to see from his point of view, and he has to do that by quite a drastic means. I'll finish off by reading this last section, the last page of the book. And what I saw was a black snow falling from the sky, black sky. There was nothing recognisable in that sky, certainly no familiar visage spread out across the night and implanted into it. There was only this blackness above and this blackness below. There was only this consuming, proliferating blackness whose only true and final success was in merely perpetuating itself as successfully as it could in a world where nothing exists that could ever hope to be anything else except what it needs to thrive upon, until everything is entirely consumed, and it is an infinite body of blackness activating itself and thriving upon itself with eternal success in a deepest abyss of entity. Probably encapsulates the idea of Ligotti's fiction there. So of course this is a messy review, I think, but I think if you're going to tackle Ligotti, it'll usually come out that way, sort of fries the mind a little bit. So anyway, that was Teatro Grottesco, and I hope you enjoyed and got something from that review. I definitely think that there's something to be said for some of the short stories. Definitely some good ideas and some concepts there. Overall, I think the language is a little bit too stilted and possibly scientific. Some plotless stories that didn't really go anywhere. Some cliche imagery. Yeah, I don't think a lot of the stories were particularly good writing. Or maybe I just didn't get it, I don't know. Anyway, that was Thomas Ligotti's Teatro Grottesco. Thanks for watching.